You're listening to The Outcue, a 21 News journalist perspective on a top news story.
Good afternoon. It is Friday, March 29th. I am Assistant News Director Jay Breen Mitchell, and today we're talking about one of the most common ways that a news story would come into the newsroom, which is that members of the community have a concern about something and they bring it to our attention. Now, the reason we're talking about this one this time around is because of a proposed medication-assisted treatment facility that may be coming to the Austintown Plaza. And we hear about this largely from social media, where people are raising certain concerns over whether or not there will be safety issues or crime increases or property values that could be hurt. And what we wanted to do was talk about how we explored how to cover this story. Because, as you know, there's what you see on television, and what you see on television is often only the very beginning of the story. The rest is the outcue. So with us today is Madison Tromler and Sydney Canty. So a little bit of background on the Austintown story. We start to hear people on different social media groups saying that they're hearing that there's a methadone clinic, they're referring to it as, which is only one element of what this business would do, that would be coming to where the JCPenney was in the Austintown Plaza. And we find out that that is true. There is a company that might be coming there that offers medication-assisted addiction treatment. And the dilemma you have there is that there's a lazy reporting way to report something like this. And I say lazy reporting because there's a difference between really doing the digging and really doing the reporting and simply holding a microphone. Anybody can say, and the community's upset and they voice their concerns, and then, give somebody a microphone to say why they're concerned about it. But are the concerns valid or not? Well, we don't know that, and we wouldn't know that if we did the story simply based on the fact that they raised concerns. So we went a little bit deeper. So I want to start with Madison. When we're facing a dilemma like this, if we're not careful and we do this wrong one way or the other, somebody could get hurt who doesn't deserve to get hurt, correct? I mean, let's say the company moving in was unscrupulous, sloppy, unlicensed, whatever it might be. Well, then we'd be hurting these homeowners by not accurately reporting that, right? The people who live in Austintown. But the flip side to that is we do have a real addiction crisis. And if this is a legitimate facility and it is serving a need, then simply reporting the resident concerns without greater context could hurt those who need the facility, right? So how do we look into that?
Yeah, and well, when people are reaching out to our newsroom and they have these concerns with this clinic coming in, I can look at them and say, would that really happen? But those are valid concerns. And I remember that was something you were talking with me at first. Like it's normal for someone, especially someone who doesn't know anything about addiction or who may not know anything about what methadone is and what this clinic would be doing. Those are valid concerns. And this woman, we got a letter and she was worried about there being a nuisance or a loitering or any kind of drug-related criminal activity if this clinic is there. So, that's what sparked us looking into it. And then it's called Concerted Care Group. It's a Maryland-based company, and they have only like 4 to 5 facilities in Maryland. So, there's none in Ohio. So we wanted to look into it and see, what this company does. So we started calling different agencies in Maryland, like law enforcement and the health departments, basically just to get an idea, even just anecdotally, is there any complaints? Is there any concerns about this company? And, what we came to find was that there were not any. We got documentation that shows that. So when you're in that situation, you have to understand that there may be valid concerns in the community, but we also know about addiction treatment and we've done stories before. So that's why the context is really important to explain that there are times where, a company can be not great for an area, but when they're doing the right thing, they could be an important asset.
Right. And the absence of something like this can also hurt the greater community when you have, an unchecked addiction problem without available treatment. Now, you mentioned that the answers were at least anecdotal, is what we started with, but it is a little more than that. I mean, we got documentation that there have not been complaints. Had there been complaints, we'd have documentation of it. So in a sense, it's almost like proving a negative, but this company had reached out to local law enforcement. They work closely with the local addiction treatment facilities and our mental health and recovery associates in their communities. And everybody said that they appear to be a good neighbor. Admittedly, a relatively new company, but that they appear to be a good neighbor. And so that doesn't diminish the concerns of the residents at all, because as you mentioned, they are valid concerns, but they're hypothetical, right? We want to do something better than hypothetical. We want something concrete. So yes, could home prices go down? Theoretically, yes, but have they? Well, we haven't found that. Could there be a crime spike? Theoretically, yes, but we didn't find that. We were fully prepared, were we not, to say the opposite, that there's some business coming in that you may not want, and we would have watchdogged that, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like in looking at the reviews and looking online and reading the company website, and again, we have proof of documentation and talking with the local officials in Maryland that live close by to this facility, we found no issues. So really people were concerned because this new facility would go in a portion of the old JCPenney's building, which is in an area where a lot of families frequent. There's a lot of local businesses. There's an ice cream shop and different restaurants. So people who may not even really know what this clinic would do were worried that it would bring a negativity to the area and put a strain on police. So, instead of just I've looked up stories that were done in the past in similar situations in other cities where people are worried about clinics coming in, addiction recovery clinics. And a lot of those stories did what Justin mentioned wouldn't be doing justice to explain the context of the situation, which is just having people say that they're worried about this clinic coming in. And instead of just, allowing people to just voice their opinions, it's important in journalism to actually explain the context and go deeper and figure out what's really going on. And from our understanding, when we talked with Darren Crivelli, he's the Austintown zoning inspector director. He's in charge of providing the permits. He said that his understanding is that this is going to be a regular, almost like a doctor's office, like the staff will be, doctors, nurses, and medical personnel, and that it wouldn't be maybe what people were thinking it would be like. So that's really what the story was, is just diving a bit deeper rather than just covering, people are worried about this clinic coming in, because it wouldn't be fair to a company who's doing great work to save people's lives.
And all this starts with just, you go in with no preconceived notion. We know people have emotions running high here, but we can't be blinded by emotion one way or the other. Some of these things are good, some of these things are bad. Let's just get the information. So we set out saying, we know we've got a story here because if this is a good facility, these residents need to know that they can calm down. If it turned out it wasn't going to be a good facility, well, then the residents needed to be empowered to be able to speak up against it with something more concrete than a hypothetical concern. Mm-hmm. Now, Sydney, I mean, this type of approach is not nearly just limited to this one story. Right. Another story we're reporting on actually tonight is that Trumbull County TMHA has awarded the contract for the demolition of a place called Riverview Apartments, which is something that you have followed and you have covered. Mm-hmm. So this went almost sort of the opposite, where the concerns were founded that we initially heard, but they were coming from a different sort of a perspective. Let's talk about that, because this goes back, a year? More than a year?
Yeah,
okay.
A little over a year. This was January of 2023 when residents found out that Riverview apartment complex was going to be demolished, was slated to be demolished. And there are hundreds of people that live inside of that apartment complex. And so
many seniors and disabled, correct?
Yes, definitely. And those concerns, made their way to us. We were able to hear that people were worried about, where am I going to go? What is going to happen if you take away this apartment complex that I live at? There's also the situation of Trumbull County not really having a lot of housing. There is a lack of inventory out there in that county. And so they were concerned, if you take this away from me, where will I go? And so if we had spun the story in a way that says Trumbull County is kicking residents out with no place to go, it would have, without really digging into the other side of this, it really would have reflected badly on the county, not rightfully so, because there's another side to the story here. So when we dug a little bit deeper and when we went to find out, why does this apartment complex that's been here for so long needs to be, demolished, we were able to find out from Donald Emerson. He's in a place of authority in the county. He says that the inside of the building was obsolete, that it was very, very old, that upkeep was costing the county a lot of money, and that it made the most sense to just demolish it, not only for the cost, but also leaky roofs. And there was an issue with the elevator. Weren't we getting into the newsroom?
We had been getting complaints into the newsroom, or concerns from residents about maintenance issues leading up to this decision, and the elevator was one we heard about a lot. It would break down. People would be, particularly if they had any kind of a physical ailment that made it hard to get around, the elevator being broken was something that they wanted fixed. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was almost always couched in this idea that they might take my home away.
Right.
And if the home is not necessarily safe, were they throwing them out of their home, or were they looking to help them?
Right. There was also, the concern of, what am I supposed to do? And so they were like, oh, we have vouchers for you. The people that are in positions of authority for Trumbull County had vouchers for the people that they were going to have to move out of this apartment complex. But the issue with that also was, since there's no housing in Trumbull County, the people were also concerned, like, oh, am I going to have to leave the county? Am I going to have to leave the city? Am I going to have to leave the state? And so there's legitimate concerns on both sides here. And we had to dig deep and understand what exactly was going on so that we could present it to the viewers in the way that was factual, that was correct, and that would not do a disservice to our community.
Do we know what they ended up? I know that they were all placed somewhere. Eventually, I know they all were placed, and that Riverview is now slated for demolition. Mm-hmm. Do you know, and you may not know this because I don't know this, and that's a dangerous thing to ask a question when you don't know the answer. Did any of them have to leave the state, or did they move them around the county?
Not that I've heard.
I have not heard either, and I would expect that I would have heard, because that would be a concern that I would expect somebody would call the newsroom about, like, I'm a lifelong Warren resident, and now I've got to go to, Indiana or something, and that did not happen.
Right, they were just kind of spread out among the county, around
existing
the county,
TMHA facilities, I believe,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good example, because it's like, I think we have to think about when viewers are watching a story and what they're taking away from it. Without explaining the issues going on in that building, it might be easy to say, why is the county doing that? Why are they doing that?
Right.
But at least, it explains that in a lot of news stories, sometimes it's like a double-edged sword situation where there's an issue here, there's an issue here, and that's the story.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes I think when stories are too simplified, it's easy for those consuming them to make an opinion really quickly that's maybe not really accurate, or how they would actually feel if they knew the real story.
I think that, and this may apply more to certain national outlets than local outlets, although I've seen it at every level, it does get back to, is this based on the facts wherever they lead you, or is this based on how can I get an emotional reaction from the audience? Because that's entertainment.
Right.
We are not in the world of emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
There are times where what we know would make a better story simply is not the facts. So then that's not the story. You can't fit these narratives however you want them to be. So yeah, look, the truth is a room full of upset residents probably makes for better television. We're not in the better television business in the sense that it's got to be what's entertaining. It's got to be what you can take home and what you can take away as value for your community, right?
And,
so
yeah.
you're not on anybody's side. These residents call. I mean, you guys have taken these calls too. I mean, everybody has to take the phone calls in the newsroom. You take calls from people you don't want to like, and by the end of the story, you may not like them, but they were right. Vice versa. People you feel nothing but endless sympathy for, and yet the facts simply don't back them up, right?
Yeah, writing these stories, delicately is so like such an intricate part of, the process. Is so important. Justin, you say all the time, words matter, that even one word could change the entire meaning of a sentence. So like really digging deep and really sitting and examining all of the facts, examining the situation and figuring out the best way to go about putting that information out there and making it as clear and concise as you possibly can is a big part of what we do.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because when you do a story and you just put it out there and it's living out there for, especially with the internet nowadays, when we post stories on our website, they're there forever. And I know they say journalism is like the first rough draft of history. And if we were to do a story about, for example, back to the methadone clinic, the addiction recovery clinic, saying,
let's be clear, they do Vivitrol, Suboxone, and methadone. There's a lot of the residents just say methadone clinic, but there's a lot of treatment.
Medicine which has been a proven way. And even in talking with the locals in Maryland, they talk about how proven it is to use these sorts of treatments to help people. But anyways, if we were to do a story just about what people are worried about and about how this is near all these, family businesses and how people are concerned about it, when someone Googles methadone clinic or when someone Googles, concerted care group Austintown, that's what they're going to see. And I mean, that's not good, because in the future we'd probably do a follow-up about, when they come here and the work that they're doing, and it just doesn't really.
Right.
So it's important to take every story very seriously and to do that extra digging rather than just a day story about how people are worried about a clinic coming in, because it's just not.
We have a responsibility to serve those people who are concerned, but sometimes serving them is not amplifying their concern so much as truth. Truth is what we have. Truth is all we have. Truth is what we live for. If their concerns are backed up by truth, then we serve them by letting the powers that be know these people have a point. If their concerns don't have truth behind them and they're based in fear, then we have a fear calming to do here. Everybody's better off if they are better informed.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, because when you do, I always say the point of doing these types of stories, any type of news story, is to better inform the public, which sounds really obvious, but to better inform people so that they can make decisions about their lives. And when people understand something that's coming in Austintown, they're going to be able to make better decisions about maybe how they'd vote on a levy in the future, or where they want to live or where they want to move. And that's why it's so important about just doing that due diligence with any story.
And yeah, like they really count on us, to do that kind of stuff for them, to be able to help them to understand, something that could affect them for who knows how many years. Like levies are there for, a long time, and whatever else, you know what I mean? It's a lot of times we even get information that we have never heard of, and we have to work to understand what it is and put in that, time and so that we can explain it in a way that is clear and concise, to the viewers as well. And that's
So what I'd like to, I'm sorry, were you going to say something? I didn't want to cut you off.
This was just a quick random thought, but I also was thinking about how just on Facebook, the posts that are circulated, just the disinformation and the sharing of information that's wrong, but that people believe when they read about.
right.
And, we have like local, residential area group Facebook pages and stuff. And I see stuff on there all the time that's just totally not accurate. So when you're talking about, for example, a levy, one of the concerns about this clinic coming was, what if this puts a strain on police? Which we've come to find that is not
Just hasn't.
what is suspected to happen at all. So, if someone believes police are spending all their time at this clinic, or that, troops are patrolling there, or police officers are patrolling, and that it's putting a strain on the area, that's just not good for someone to believe something that's not true.
Right, and social media, as I think we all know, but we may know more acutely. I mean, the way things can get twisted and how quickly they can get twisted is astounding. You know, a quick aside today, one story that I was checking out was a story about somebody having their arm cut off by someone with a sword. That was what was being talked about. You know what it was? Standard medical call, just a medical call. No sword, no assault, no nothing. But this was something that we had to check out today. What I want to wrap up with a little bit is because we're talking in very high-minded terms right now. We're talking about journalism and why it's important. And of course, I could do that all day long, and I know you guys could too. But to bring it down to the level of the average person, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what it's like when you take the initial call or the initial premise of what you think the story is going to be, and how it feels when it changes entirely, like when you think you're entirely, you know, in one person's corner. Because look, and when I say in one person's corner, look, obviously we're not pulling for anybody in terms of politics or in terms of like the choosing good guys or bad guys, but certainly if somebody is doing wrong to somebody else, you want to do right by the person who's disadvantaged. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the way that you feel as that evolves with new information and how that happens, just as people. Talk as people.
Yeah. So I think when you get an initial phone call or when you hear an initial story tip, it's easy to be like, oh, and you know, like, and feel for the other person. But I think what's really important is to take it with a grain of salt, but listen and understand that what they're saying could be maybe 100% true and everything they're saying is correct. But just like they always say, there really is always another side of the story. It's never black and white. There's always different sides to the story. So when at first, you know, or maybe when I come in and I read my assignment and we were thinking, oh, we could go in this direction, but you know, we got to do some more digging to figure it out. It is important to be open-minded. And I'm very passionate about the idea of the story changing and not just doing what you think the story is going to be, because that's going to fit perfectly in the newscast that day. And that's what we're expecting it to be. And that's what we want it to be. That's not how it works.
Run a news organization that way.
Exactly. And I think when you're out in the field and when you're learning and talking to different people and when you're asking the right questions and really making sure they're answering their questions and not just telling you what they want you to hear, what they want to say, you start, you know, you may notice the story is changing. And I think for me, that's where it comes in. You have to be prepared and do your research and make sure, again, you know, I'm in my mind, the example I'm thinking of is, you know, when you have a situation where, for example, this is a good one, when their handicap ramp was destroyed in Warren.
Todd and Palmyra.
Yeah.
And it's happened multiple times off of the intersection of Todd and Palmyra. And I mean, and I did feel for them. I was like, man, that stinks. Their handicap ramp has been hit multiple times. It's in a funky area where the roads are and there's lots of traffic. And, you know, so when I spoke with the county, with the city of Warren, and the county, you learn about what they're dealing with and the other side of the story, and that it's not that simple to just change the law. And they explain that, and in that moment though, you do have to be careful and listen to exactly what they're saying, because if they're just like, oh no, it just doesn't work like that, or this, you know, you have to really check up on that. So because
what was their answer in that case?
So what they were saying was that because of the traffic study that was done in 2019, which is through the state, because they found that it wasn't a warranted stoplight, which is what these people wanted to stop all the traffic on that intersection, because the study found it wasn't warranted, it could actually be a liability to the city for them to install a certain traffic light there. And if there's an accident.
Essentially going against the state's advice. Mm-hmm. And if something were to happen, somebody could then sue the county or the city saying, well, you knew that this was not warranted and you did it anyways, so you're negligent.
Right. And even if the city wants it to be there, I now had an understanding of why, because I was like, why wouldn't they just put it there? Why wouldn't, if it would save them money and time from having to deal with this? You know, and that's usually when you have those thoughts of like, you're confused on, well, what's the real, why? that's when, you start to get those answers, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But it doesn't necessarily change the story, but you have to have that understanding to be able to explain to people so that it's fair. That's really what it comes down to.
Right. Yeah. No, bouncing off of going in every day with an open mind, like that's very much exactly what you have to do. You said speak to this as people. We even have to report it just like as people. You know what I mean? Like going in, talking to everybody that we need to be talking to and really, really listening, because sometimes things could be completely, totally different than what you thought it would be. And a lot of times I've noticed that's how it happens more often than not. It's almost like more often than not, like where we go in and we think, oh, the story is going to be A, B, and C, and it turns out to be D, E, F, and X, Y, and Z, and then it's like, okay, how do you work this into, what it is that the story actually is, and getting ready to, go ahead and try to explain it in a way that makes sense, and a way that like, oh, gosh, I learned something today. How can I, make this like something that's clear for everybody to like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes. And that's something I honestly value.
it's a little stressful sometimes. Honestly, like
more work. It's more work, and that's something I value about WFMJ is I feel like we really work hard. Our managers are passionate about not doing those black and white stories. She said this, he said that.
Right.
And a lot of times at 6 o'clock when you're doing a day turn, stories can seem that way. They can seem like, oh, this happened, source A says this, here's their response. But I am passionate about, and I think we do a good job about, taking extra time and covering that gray area and explaining the issues that are going on, And for example, with the 2019 study that showed that it wasn't warranted to have that traffic light, it's also important to look into, okay, well, what are the laws behind that? Does it need another look? Because if there's still crashes and there's still an issue, what about that? Like,
Right.
And that's where my brain is like, well, wait, and the why. And as journalists, we're not always, I personally have maybe the weakness of always being like, well, why?
But that's not a weakness as a journalist. I mean, you're supposed to ask why.
Well, sometimes you have to explain information and get it to the public without, trying to play detective. But at the same time, that's where I think we do a good job of investigating and doing that. And I think we bring a little bit of that into our work where we wonder the same things and we're like, well, wait a second, well, why is that the law? And, I don't know.
And it also extends to when someone calls you with a news tip. Why are they calling you with this? Because everybody has a motivation. I mean, we've all, I imagine we've all, I know I certainly have, had sources, sometimes very good sources, who I've had to burn because that thing came where they crossed the line and they fed me a line that made them look good and the truth didn't back them up. I mean, I've watched people's entire careers unravel who had previously been very good and reliable sources, and it would always start with, what you really ought to be looking into is this. What's your motivation for that? I mean, I had a source once who told me I needed to look into payroll records at YSU in the administration, and this is more than a decade and a half ago, so this is not current, saying that there was inflated salaries happening at the upper levels, that people were basically doctoring things to give themselves and their friends more money. And not only was it not there, but in response, somebody anonymously dropped off payroll records in the departments that this source was a union head for. And that's what he was doing.
Oh, wow.
And it became the beginning of his downfall. And why was he calling me with this when it wasn't? Because he wanted me to look somewhere else, so I never looked at him. And it backfired.
Wow.
And I mean, he ended up not only fired, but indicted. I mean, it really was the beginning of his downfall.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably wouldn't have happened if I didn't question his motivation.
Right. See, I've had to learn to not be so trusting. I've had to learn to not put anything past anybody. Yes.
Trust
exactly.
but verify. You can have sources that you trust, but you always have to double check it. That's all.
Right. Yeah. I feel like and I mean, we've been doing this for 4 years now?
Yeah.
And at first, I think just like any people who just got out of college, or you learn to not be so naive. And I've lost that like naiveness. Like I just feel like I question everything, like almost like, you just and I think that's what makes good journalism. And I think if you're passionate and nosy about things, like it's a good thing, because I think even when viewers are watching, do you ever like watch your family watch something on the news and just kind of you'll hear them kind of ask, well, why does the state do that? Or who's letting the, and those are the kinds of questions that we like to ask ourselves and look into. So I think it's important to read between the lines.
And when that moment comes where they're saying, well, why did they do that? I sit there and I go, oh man, I hope we say it in this story. And we're not.
Yeah, like just wait there.
We're dropping the ball if I'm sitting next to an average viewer and this is what they're wondering.
Right,
we better deliver.
Yeah,
And,
we're just like, just wait 30 seconds. And like, it's like at the end.
So always, we always have to think about what the average viewer might be thinking and what they need to know, not just necessarily what they want to hear, which really is the bringing this episode full circle is really that there are people, when people are angry, they want to hear that they're right.
Right.
Sometimes they're not, and what they need to hear is where they might be mistaken. Right. So with that, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Outcue. We will see you back next week. And as always, if you ever have anything that you want us to look into, news@WFMJ.com, watchdog@WFMJ.com, or just call our newsroom and you get to talk to one of us, 330-744-8821. Until next week, thank you very much for watching.